Welcome back to my shop. As you can see, I am knee-deep in drawers right now. I've gone ahead and I've glued up and installed the bottoms to the drawers. I've actually done this procedure in prior episodes, so I didn't really see the need to bore you with that again in this project. But now I just need to clean up the sides and fit the drawers, but those are basically done. And that's going to allow me to move on to what I think is one of the cooler aspects of this project, and that's going to be a set of bracket feet for the bottom. I think bracket feet are really going to add a visual interest to the case. They're going to be a little bit curvy, so that'll offset the kind of sharp angles and right angles on the chest. And it's also going to add a little bit more breadth and width to the bottom of the chest. So it's going to, I think, really balance it out nicely. So this is going to be an opportunity for me to incorporate a little bit more design and have a little bit of fun with how I want to shape those feet, and also incorporate a new technique into this project. So this is going to be all about how I design and then construct those bracket feet for the chest of drawers. This is a pretty fun and kind of creative part of the process, and I'm just sort of trying to design and lay out what my bracket feet are going to look like. And I'm really using really a set of French curves, and it's kind of easy. It's actually easier than you would think. I kind of had the general idea. I want kind of an OG here, and then I'm going to have a little bit of a bull nose, and then a little bit more kind of detail. I want to have a little bit of a point here so that I have some little sharp edges here and there, and then I just kind of want to match this same OG curve on this side. So all I do is I take the same, general part of the French curve that I used for the outside of the bracket, and just sort of connect my dots, find a spot on the curve that works, and then just transition it right in. So I've kind of been playing with this because I'm trying to get the width of this foot to be visually appealing, and I want it to be wide enough that it's gonna, sort of be substantial enough to support the base of the cabinet. So this is kind of the general idea. I'll then transfer this, I'll cut this out, and I'll transfer it to a piece of MDF and rough it out, and then that'll become my template for actually cutting the bracket feet themselves. I've gone ahead and double stick taped my cutout of the profile onto a piece of 1/4" MDF, and I'm actually going to then cut this out using my jigsaw. Ideally, if I had a scroll saw, I would probably use that. These curves are just too small and too concave for me to be able to handle, even with my kind of narrowest blade on the bandsaw. So that's how I'm gonna create my template. So I have my template all done. And then this is the piece of stock I'm going to be sourcing the bracket feet from. It's a nice thick piece of stock. This is about as thick as I could get out of, I think it was 5/4 or 4/4 to start with. I do want nice thick feet because basically the side profile that you see here is actually also going to be the profile of the front of that bracket. So the bracket itself is going to be shaped. And so what that means is I need a nice thick piece that I can cut this profile out of and still have plenty of material left. So that's why I want a nice thick piece, and I'm just gonna source these all along from the top. So I'll cut one, flip this over, cut the next one, flip this over, cut the next one. So my first step is just gonna be to rip this board to the same height as the foot. And it's important to note here that the grain for these bracket feet is going, it's gonna be basically horizontal to the ground and horizontal to the and parallel to the bottom of the case. You don't want the feet going this way because you have very thin material here, and if you had grain going in this direction, it could easily snap off that little piece. So grain direction is important. So over at the table saw, I just line this up so that I'm going to be ripping basically the exact right height for this bracket foot. So now, all I have to do is double stick tape the template if I can actually remove the backing and align it right along that edge. Here you can see my block. I've got it clamped down to the top of my bench, and it's overhanging obviously so that my blade won't hit my bench. And then I've also got just a scrap piece of 1/4 inch MDF here, and I'm going to use that to support basically the offcut side of my jigsaw. Otherwise I'd run the risk of the jigsaw tipping because that 1 foot wouldn't be supported. And then that'll let me just sort of move that around and keep this supported. Now I don't have to get right up to that line because I'm going to use a template routing bit to clean that up, and then I'll have to clean it up by hand to get the final corners all squared away. But this should get rid of most of the material. Again, I have to use my jigsaw here because I just don't have a bandsaw blade that's narrow enough, and I don't have a scroll saw, so this is going to have to suffice. Now that I have the shape generally roughed out using the jigsaw, I'll come over to the router table and clean up the rest. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky because I'm going to be routing into end grain here, so I want to just take little tiny nibbles at a time. I really don't want to be very aggressive here because I'll run the risk of actually chipping out that end grain. I'm also installing a guidepost here, and that will give me a pivot point so that I can work off that, and hopefully this is soft enough wood I won't run into too much trouble here. There are really just 2 spots that I have to clean up by hand. Again, this, you can see the black line is still showing here, and then where I square off this foot at the bottom, I also have to clean up by hand. So I actually have a rounded rasp, and that works perfectly for getting into this little nook here. In fact, it sort of creates the exact right round profile, and it really doesn't take a whole lot of work here. I just want to get to the point where I've removed that black marker. Then for all of the convex surfaces, I can just take care of that using my spindle sander. Then the last bit here is just cleaning up this inside corner here, and this needs to be a nice crisp 90-degree angle. And the easiest way for me to clean that up is actually just using a chisel. So I'll start out and just square this off so I know I have a nice square place to register my chisel. And I'll make a mark. Clamp this down again. And use a wide chisel, drop it right in that groove I made with my marking knife, and just clean out this inside corner. Now that I have the curve all nice and cleaned up, I need to deal with cutting this off from the rest of this block. Now, I'm not actually going to be cutting the curve on this remaining side because that's actually going to happen after I glue up each of these brackets. However, it is important that I know where it should be cut. And I'm basically focusing on this, where this foot gets squared in, and that's going to be the furthest point. So I'm going to square that off, And now the trick is I need to miter this because each of these brackets is going to have a mating pair and they're going to be mitered at that corner. Now, just so I don't screw up when I get over to the miter saw, I'm going to put a pencil mark to remind me which direction the miter needs to go. So over here at the miter saw, I will line this up against my mark. Make sure I'm on the correct side of that line. And there is 1/2 of my bracket foot. Now, in order for me to glue these up, I need to miter them. And obviously that's sort of a half end grain where that miter is, so it's not going to be a super strong glue joint. So what I'm going to do is put a spline in that miter, and that's going to hold that joint together a little bit more effectively. I'm going to put it towards the back a little bit because I am going to be coving out the sides a little bit, so I want to make sure that the spline doesn't interfere with where that cove ends up happening. So what I've devised to do this is I just have a block of cherry that I've put a 45-degree angle on, so it's a nice solid piece. It's fitting up against the stop block on my miter gauge, and then I can basically just drop my piece in, and the fence is set up so that it fits nice and snug in that little kind of wedge. And then what I'll do is I'll just use my push block here because I really don't want my fingers anywhere near that blade. But because that's held in place on 3 different surfaces, it's nice and secure and I can do this operation safely. And then I'll go and do the mating spline on the other side. So then when I hold the 2 pieces together, those spline recesses match perfectly. So all I need is a piece of wood to fit in there, and that's going to be a nice solid miter joint. I've gone ahead and glued up my front bracket feet, and you can see I've already trimmed off the tops of the splines. I'll still need to clean that up a little bit, but you're not going to see the top or the bottom of this piece when it's completed. So those are glued up and pretty much ready to cut the side profile there. The back bracket feet I still have to complete. And basically the difference with the back feet is that you aren't going to be able to see the pieces in the back. So I don't actually have to cut the kind of OG profile for the backs. So all I'm going to do is just create a second bracket, and I just need to figure out how I'm going to attach it at a right angle. Before I finish cutting those back bracket feet, however, I realized I have a potential problem here. If you look closely, you can see where my pencil line is, where I'm going to cut the back profile. And if you flip this up, you can see that my spline actually extends fairly far out towards this edge relative to how deep this curve is right here. So what I did is I took my combo square and set it basically the deepest that that curve could possibly go. And if you see, and I place it along where that curve is scribed, I have a problem there. If I were to cut the curve as I have it here, I would actually cut into that spline, and you'd see that on the side of the profile. So before I finish making the back feet, I need to redraw this curve into something that still looks good but doesn't go quite as deep. What I've done next is I've cut another strip of 1/4 inch MDF that's the same height as my original template. And basically I just need to redraw that back curve so that it doesn't go any deeper than what I have my combination square set from when I laid it against the spline for the existing feet. I have my new curve profile all set up, so I've just transferred that curve to the back of my back piece. So you can see that it's a bit shallower than the last one. I just used my French curve to basically just make that new cut. Now, I have to decide how I'm going to attach the back of this bracket. Now again, this is going to be basically the back of the case, so you're not going to see it. So I don't have to do the same kind of splined miter that I did for the front legs or front feet. So because I haven't done enough dovetails yet on this project, I am actually going to do a half blind dovetail. So you can see I've got my tails laid out here, and these tails will just slide in to the back of this piece like that. And the only important thing here is that my tails, and that's why I'm using a fairly thick piece here, will actually extend further into the bracket leg than my curve does, and that will ensure that after I waste out that material, I'll still have enough of the dovetails registered into this piece to be structurally sound. So all I have to do is, and I'm basically going to just cut this to length when I'm done, so it'll be easier to cut those dovetails with the longer piece. Much like the drawers, I've just used a little rabbet in the back of my dovetails, and that allows me to just drop my tailboard right on top of the pin board. So basically the pin board in this case is that bracket foot. So I just line it up just like I did with the drawer fronts and mark my sockets. All right, so I've got all of the material wasted out here, and I had to be very careful because this is, you know, a very small piece, and the last thing I want to do is sort of split it right down the middle. That'd be a big problem. But so I made sure that the tails are, you know, good fit, but not super tight where I have to bang it in. Again, you're not even going to see these, and they actually turned out pretty well, even though you're not going to see them. It's almost kind of a shame. But basically, that's the back left bracket foot, and then all I have to do is just cut this one. I'll probably do a diagonal here, but again, it doesn't have to be fancy because this is going to be the back of the case and you aren't going to see it. You can see that gluing up these rear bracket feet is really no problem at all. Even though we have the mitered edge here, all I had to do was flip them upside down, and that allowed me to clamp them up with no problem.